Welcome to another episode of SUMA Observations and Conversations, a podcast by Southern Utah Museum of Art where we talk to artists, curators, art historians, and staff about what's happening at SUMA. I'm Emily Ronquillo, the Director of Marketing and Design and your host for the podcast. My co-host for this episode is Jason Moodie, SUMA's Director of Learning and Visitor Experience. We sit down with 3 SUU faculty members from different areas of the university to talk about how they engaged with the museum in their courses. Kevin Koontz from Outdoor Recreation and Parks and Tourism tells us about how his classes visit SUMA to learn more about museum interpretation. Alex Bradshaw-Yerby from Dance shares how her students react to exhibitions through movement. And Susanna Herrmann from Graphic Design talks about how she uses the museum's collection to teach typography and poster design. Each of these small conversations shares benefits to an interdisciplinary approach, how students have connected to art, and some advice for how faculty can incorporate the museum into their curriculum. I hope you enjoy hearing from our fantastic guests. All right, I'm joined today by Jason Moodie, SUMA's Director of Learning and Visitor Experience, and Kevin Koontz, our Outdoor Academic Coordinator for Outdoor Pathways and Adjunct Professor for Outdoor Recreation and Parks and Tourism at SUU. And today we're talking about how to use the museum in the classroom. So, welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think first, this is Jason's first time on the podcast. So as you know, we have just a rotating group of co-hosts on here. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excited to talk about this. And so that leads us to Kevin. Can you tell us more about yourself, your background, what you're teaching at SUU, how long you've been here, all of that?
Yeah, I'm originally from Southern California, but I've been here at SUU for going on 13 years now. I teach with the Outdoor Recreation and Parks and Tourism program, various classes I think are fun classes. Intro to Backpacking, Americans in the Outdoors, Park Interpretation, that kind of stuff. And then I'm also the academic coordinator with the Outdoor Pathways program, which means for students who are doing internships with our various public land partners, the National Park Service, the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management. SUU has partnerships with all of these different federal agencies, and we're able to place students into really cool internships, and then I help students plug those internships into their degree plan so that they can get academic credit for the work they're doing regionally with our public lands.
That's really great. And I think kind of the first thing that people would want to know is this feels very unrelated to the arts. So why are you on the podcast today? One of my favorite classes that I teach is the interpretation class. And when people hear the term interpretation, oftentimes they're thinking of languages, right? Mm-hmm. You're interpreting one language to another, but this course specifically focuses on interpreting the landscape or the resource of our various public lands. So whether it's a national park with incredible scenery, we're interpreting why it's preserved and why it's there, or maybe a historical site like Golden Spike and interpreting the history and the value of that as a place historically.
Yeah, and I love the connection that we can make with that, because I know when your students are coming, and I've led a couple of those tours, and we focus on what it's like to look at art and focusing on that interpretation, that idea of self-explanation or self-connection with that. It's been fun on those tours.
Right, and so bringing students to the museum, it helps them make those various connections of like, oh, how am I going to communicate the importance of something, whatever it is, whether it's art or a landscape or a historical artifact. I've got to think about that in different ways that's going to connect my visitors emotionally to it. And bringing them to the museum helps them consider one of the other facets of that, of okay, how can I hone in on the emotional side of this and really connect people and make them care about it.
Yeah, and we're easily accessible. You don't have to drive all the way up the canyon to go and see this. But I think that the biggest key, I know that when I was focusing on the tours specifically, it was learning to look. You know, it's one thing to walk past and glance and get that glancing view, but actually taking a moment to truly see what's there.
Well, and that's part of, that's absolutely part of it, right? Is they're coming to the museum as visitors, as guests, so they're having that oftentimes very first time experience of thinking, what is it that I want to know about? And then turning that into okay, if I were tasked with talking about this, interpreting it, giving a presentation on it, what are those answers going to be that I have the questions about? As a first-time visitor. Oftentimes it's like, oh yeah, they've been going to, national parks. They've been hiking since they were a little kid. They've been camping with their family for forever. So they start to kind of forget some of those fundamental level questions. It's just like, oh yeah, I already know this higher level stuff. So bringing them to the museum helps take them back to that introductory level.
Sure, a deep look.
Yeah, I think that's something we're constantly talking about too, is just, right, the statistic that people are only looking at a piece of art for an average of 6 seconds. And so what are we doing on the learning teams, on the marketing teams to help people enhance their museum experience? So I think it's really great that you're able to bring your class and see kind of how they approach that, but then give them that opportunity to learn how to engage with an art museum.
And a lot of their positions in the future may be with a type of museum. Many of our parks have, whether it's a natural history museum or a geology museum or some sort of museum type venue, they're going to be working and doing interpretation in those types of locations.
Sure, learning centers and things like that, visitor centers.
Right.
Yeah. So how long have you been teaching this interpretation class? And then how long have you been visiting the museum as part of it? What first clued you in or brought that idea to visit the museum as part of your course?
Yeah, so I think I've been teaching this class for 8 years now. And part of the way that I have formatted the class is we meet twice a week. On Mondays, we talk about the readings, we go over the homework, we focus on, kind of that side of the course content. And then every Wednesday, I have different guest speakers from various agencies. So whether I bring someone in from Cedar Breaks or the Forest Service, or Pipe Spring National Monument, and then part of that is coming to visit SUMA. I don't know that I answered the entire question.
Yeah, no, it was 3 questions. I think, what made you think to visit SUMA as part of that?
Oh, I think the first time that I brought students to SUMA, there was an exhibit that was a really easy connection between, this is what we do, and this is what the students are learning about, and there was a very obvious connection. Maybe it was the Golden Spike
that's
exhibit
what
or
I was
something.
thinking. This fall 2019.
Right, and I remember that being a very easy. This is a slam dunk because the connection is very obvious. But even when the exhibits are less tangible towards public lands, I still see that value in having students kind of reframe how they're thinking and how they would be tasked with presenting something.
Yeah. Have you had a favorite exhibit throughout, the last now 5 years or so, 4.5 years, or one that the students have responded particularly well to?
certainly the Golden Spike one was an easy, like I said, an easy connection that they were able to draw immediately. The salt lines of this last semester was also an interesting, because of all the environmental aspects that had to do with that exhibit. So that wasn't there was no great leap for the students to be like, well, I don't know why this is relevant to what we're talking about. So that was another one where it was maybe a more challenging conversation or discussion of like, oh, we're gonna approach climate change and the negative impacts of that, and how do you present that in a way that's emotional and impactful, and the art of that exhibit was very much impactful.
A lot more interpretation of an existence or experience.
Right.
Are there some that were a little bit more challenging to include over the years?
There certainly were, but I remember them being challenging, but I don't remember specifically like, oh, this was the exhibit. But I do remember there have certainly been instances where in the past it's like, okay, now we've done our experience at the museum. When we get back to the classroom next week, we're gonna have to reframe and talk about it to help students put it into the perspective relevant. So it happens occasionally, but again, I feel like there's still value in having that experience, and then the thought exercise of like, all right, you saw this artwork. It was very abstract, or there was a lot of uncertainty or room for various interpretations. How would you approach it if you were talking about it to an audience, and what are the things that you're going to draw their eyes back to and ask them to relook at and consider from different perspectives?
Yeah, or perhaps it's a good time to flip the tone on them rather than being the one who's giving the information. Now they know what it's like to be the person receiving that information and or not necessarily understanding.
Right.
So I guess it's a good way to flip that role on them.
And right, that's always kind of what I'm trying to place them in that context of like, okay, this is new information for me. And like I said before, what is it that I, as the first time visitor, what do I want to know? Because those are the questions that they should be looking to answer as, as someone presenting that information. It's like, oh, this is what I wondered about, so this is what I want to share, rather than the expert who knows everything about it, right? I know the year that this was created, and I know the background of the artist and their family history and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting to the expert, but it's not necessarily interesting to the first timer. And you have to meet those visitors where they're at. And so that's the reminder. It's like, oh, I'm the first time visitor. This is new for me. What do I need to know about? What am I interested in knowing about? Rather than as the interpreter, what do I want to tell you about?
You're finding meaningful connections.
Yeah, I do think back to kind of not necessarily the early days of SUMA, maybe the mid days of SUMA, where this is before we had Becky on as our curator.
Going all the way back to the Braithwaite building?
Not that far. No, I'm thinking just like 2020, 2019, just like, before Becky got here, thinking about some of those exhibits that perhaps you were bringing your classes to that weren't related to the outdoors, but also didn't have a lot of interpretation. And so I think that's a really great way for you to frame that back to the students with asking, like, what would you have wanted to know, just so they're in that mindset. But things are a little bit different around here now that I feel like we have the people to interpret things.
And like I said, that learning to look is a skill that we oversee a lot. We don't really pay attention to the world around us, and so learning that we need to pause and actually take a moment is really, really important. And I think the museum allows for something like that to happen.
Well, and on that thought, like, again, whether it's a piece of art or a landscape, look at it, get your first initial look, then learn a little something about it, and then look back. And that's when you're going to notice some of the, the more the more finite details of like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that, whatever it is, it could be like, oh, there's a few leaves changing color in the distance, or oh, okay, this is the medium that the artist, chose to use, and I didn't notice these details until I looked back, and because I knew what to look for this time. I got my first initial look, I learned something, and then I was able to look back with that new information.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes when I'm giving a tour, I'll talk to it as about like that visual conversation. It's a back and forth. The audience has to participate in the work. They're the second half, the most important half, because otherwise it's just not a conversation.
Right, and who's it for otherwise?
Yeah, I really love those parallels that you're drawing between appreciating, slowing down, looking at art, but then taking those skills also outside. I think people need to do more of both. Less screen time would be better. But listen to this podcast. Anyway, anything else you want to add about kind of how you're using SUMA in the classroom, maybe what you would tell other professors about how or why they should use SUMA?
Yeah, it's obviously getting students up on their feet, actively engaging with professionals here in the museum who know their field and their craft. It's just going to be way more engaging, obviously, than talking at them and lecturing them. Now again, like Jason said, they become participants and active in their own education and their own learning.
And that's really what my goal is, to create a great connection between SUU, the faculty there, and what we do over here. That SUMA can be a resource for any course. And again, it's just that activation, being outside of a classroom space, engaging somewhere else that's a little bit different. And regardless of what curriculum you're teaching, we've got something over here for you. Whatever that is, even if it's just coming to be in a different space and to have a quiet moment, to have something that's separate is an important time.
But yeah, seeing work in the real place, I think, is always going to be a good reminder for students who are used to sitting in a classroom. Like, oh, okay, now let's take this out to the real world and put it into the non-academic perspective.
Yeah, and there is a nuance between that, seeing it on a screen and then seeing it in real life. You see the artist's hand, you see their voice, and you get to participate.
Well, and you get to see the details that you're looking for as the individual, rather than the details that the photographer chose to show you in a photo of the art, right? So you're always going to get that kind of bias of like, oh, okay, if I'm looking at somebody else's photograph of an art piece, well, now there's a whole different lens in front of that, right? Now I'm seeing that lens that the photographer has chosen to show me, rather than, again, what I as the individual am most looking at.
Yeah, or even scale. I think people lose that when you're seeing it either on a phone or up on a big projector, where coming to the museum, it's different. Puts yourself in perspective to a piece of art.
The Mona Lisa effect. It's much smaller than you think, yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
Not that I can think of. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think this is great. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing your classes.
I
We'll keep that partnership continuing.
We'll continue to do so.
Again and again, whether or not it's related directly to tourism.
Future students
or outdoors.
of ORPT 4020 can look forward to coming to visit SUMA as part of the curriculum.
It's really great. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back. Now, Jason and I are joined by Alex Bradshaw-Yerby, who is the Associate Chair of Theater, Dance, and Arts Administration and the Director of the Dance Program. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
As Jason and I kind of mentioned, we're just talking about SUMA and your coursework, kind of how you're integrating it into your classes with your students. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you teach at SUU, and then how you've come to use SUMA?
Certainly, yeah. So this is my 6th year here at Southern Utah University, and in our curriculum, I teach pretty widely. So I teach a lot of the dance education coursework for students on education track for secondary licensure. I also teach a lot of the modern technique series. That's my background as a professional, as a contemporary modern professional dancer. I also teach the dance kinesiology series. Gosh, it's one of the wonderful things about being here is I get to teach a lot of things. And I also teach, which really helps with SUMA, the SUMA connections, is I teach in the composition series, the dance composition series. And so over the years, I've had the opportunity to come over to SUMA several times with my students, previously with my dance improvisation class. And most recently this semester, I brought students for the Composition 1 class. And I can talk about that. They had a wonderful time here with the Salt Lines exhibit, and they keep talking about it, that it was their favorite time, their favorite study all semester. And I think part of that interdisciplinary inspiration was really formative for their learning. So that's kind of an overview of what I teach. And this semester, when I brought my Composition 1 class, it was during the Salt Lines exhibit. And what was wonderful, about all the exhibits, but that exhibit had such wonderful tactile and multi-sensory installations with sound and poetry and photography and clay. Because something that I talk a lot about with my dance composition students is how, every place is a beginning, and that, whether that is connecting to the landscape, connecting to another person, connecting to artwork, that all creativity happens in collaboration. And so when we came over to SUMA, we were specifically really investigating sensory inspiration, what that would mean to respond to the landscape that existed. So that would be the sound landscape of the I can't remember the artist's name that had the big sound installation.
The Namaknazar
Yes,
by Hylozoic Desires.
Yes, thank you. So we were responding to the sound. They were responding. We had a wonderful tour with Jason, who talking us through the whole exhibit and also understanding the inspiration that the artists had with the landscape and with their artwork. And so then the students had an opportunity during another class period to just kind of explore and using some dance material, some choreography they had built in the studio, they translated it to the stage, or not to the stage, to the SUMA stage. So they had kind of some material to work with, but then they could see how it flexed and responded and to the landscape they were in. Like, for instance, there's that corridor in the back, that small space, how a change of space can change the way that they perform a particular choreography, or particularly in that corridor with is it Alexandra Fuller? Is that with her artwork, which is also so dance related. Yeah, especially just how much movement is in the photography. They could really respond to that. And so they came in. They just kind of explored that one day, and then they came in for a third day that we really set up for them more as a performance, sort of a durational performance in the exhibit. And it was wonderful to see how they elevated their investment in the material just with being here for 1 week, and also just with the expectation that they were being watched, because there were people coming in to see, there was a photographer, that they were prepared for that. And they talked about getting into almost a flow state with the artwork, that they never felt bored, or they never felt spent the way they would if they were just improvising, because they were constantly responding to the artwork. And I think it really inspired them to want to collaborate more across disciplines with other artists and outside of dance, which I think, especially in our program, which is a liberal arts program, really dance, I would say dance to learn versus learn to dance. They're using dance as a lens to understand their world. That no better way to do that than in real time in collaboration with other art. So,
it was really fun to watch them in the galleries and how they interacted with the work, but also interacted with each other. You know, when one would start a movement, it started a ripple effect through the rest of them, and then it carried over and went into other areas and started to just morph and change as they were going. So I mean, it was really fun to watch them do it.
Yeah, thank you for being there as an audience member. I think your presence there also really inspired them. I mean, they dance in front of me all the time, and if it was just me, they might not have been quite as magical as with Jason.
Well, and just that they did it around guests, and like you said, a photographer was there, and the museum was open, so anybody could have walked in, and there were general public that were walking in and saw what was happening and watched and observed for a short time before they moved on, and it was good.
Yeah, there was one audience member in particular who was just a general public observer that came up to the dancers after the performance, in quotes, and thanked them. She thought that it was sort of a part of the exhibit, that it felt so integrated and rehearsed in a way that she mentioned to the students how it really helped her see the exhibit in a different way. So I think it helped the students to experience the artwork in a different way, but it also enhanced for the other viewers their experience of the
I'm curious of the conversations that you had with them or they had with each other about the work before they came and did the interpretation. You know, what were some of those? Were there works that were more difficult to relate or some that were easier? You mentioned Alex Fuller, which there was a lot of flow and definite movement in those, but you know, the Namak Nazar or any of those, some of the photographs that were a little more abstract.
Yeah, you know, I think that after their initial tour with you, which for many of them that was their first exposure to the exhibit, was when you gave them the guided tour. And in speaking with them, I think some of the work that felt the most abstract or hardest to relate to at first was some of the photography, the aerial photography of the Salt Lake and Salt Flats, as well as the aerial photography of the Indian desert. And so I think the first day when they were just sort of experimenting and researching on their own, they were having trouble figuring out how to relate to those photographs. But I think because they had to lean in so much harder to respond to such an abstract photograph, that I found them really gravitating toward that work on the second day. Particularly in the classroom, before we came, we had been experimenting with this study by a choreographer named William Forsythe called Points, Lines, and Planes, which is a way to sort of carve and design space in a sort of a geometric theoretical arrangement. And so then once they were able to make a connection between something they knew in their body, which felt abstract but was close to them from a dance perspective, they could use that as a bridge to relate to the photography. And then I think actually using dance as a lens, again, helped them understand another art form in a deeper way. So that they loved the well with the fish. I think they were really drawn to that, wanting to dance with the well and with the fish. But I think they mentioned in our sort of postmortem of the performance that they were really drawn to that, but were trying to figure out, they had a harder time figuring out how to relate to it. I think in that way, instead of relating directly to the visual, what they saw, they found themselves relating more to the themes of water or lack of water, or sort of nauticalness or the depth of a well. So I think instead of trying to really lean into the image in front of them, they leaned into shared imagery between the two artworks. So, but they all loved, especially the sound. I think they were surprised by how much they loved the sound, which I think at first felt alienating for some of them, but the more they listened and the more they connected to it, they wanted to press the button over and over again.
Well, and you had started it by pressing that button, but it's only 17 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So when they were still dancing in silence, essentially, at the end.
Yes, they
and
were.
carrying it through.
Yeah, I think it was really beautiful how it started, or I guess I sort of maybe forced that beginning for them, or that was, I guess, my creative offering to the work. But then, once they were in silence, I feel like they were already kind of in this flow state. But I was thinking on the previous day when they were experimenting and how they were kind of in conversation with the sound.
And it seemed like they were very by themselves at first, but then really came together as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, their first activity or challenge on the first day was to go off on their own and find a work that they were drawn to for whatever reason and respond directly to that work. And then on the second day, when we did more of the public-facing performance, they were encouraged to not only be drawn to the artwork, but be drawn to one another. And it did end up that they sort of
they started separate,
and then they all came together. Whereas the first day they stayed sort of in these separate lands. But yeah.
Thank you. It was great.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you said you had 3 visits to the museum for this, correct? Like you brought your students in 3 separate times. So obviously that takes a little bit of pre-planning in your curriculum syllabus. So kind of what led you to partner with the museum for something like this? And what are the benefits of working with the museum and tying that into your curriculum?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think in this particular instance, if I recall, Jason and we had connected previously in a different collaborative clinic with different entities on campus that are working with education. And Jason invited me in, because we had just never really formally met. He invited me to come see the Salt Lines exhibit. And that was, I think, the end of the fall semester. And that was right when I was getting ready to plan my spring courses. And I always teach Composition 1 in the spring. And so I think it was, in this case, it was directly having conversation with Jason that spurred and seeing the Salt Lines exhibit that spurred my inspiration to want to build it into the curriculum. And so at the beginning of the semester I'm like, I know that I want to have at least a week at SUMA when this exhibit is still happening. I know it closes on this day, so I've got to get in at this time. And I kind of planned my whole semester around that week so that the curriculum really remained the same for the course, but that this experience would support it. And I wanted there to be enough time in the studio before we came, because it's a Composition 1 course. It's really kind of the brass tacks and basics of dance composition. So I wanted them to be empowered with enough tools and experience that then they could come to this space and feel excited and empowered to deepen that versus kind of throwing it all in at once. So I sort of strategically put it toward the middle of the semester before the exhibit closed. But other than that, I mean, honestly, it wasn't that hard. I just had to know that I wanted to do it. And SUMA, you made it so simple for me to schedule it with the scheduling form, and you were so communicative with me right away. It was so simple. And I felt so supported in that experience. And Jason taking time to meet with the students for an hour and give them a private tour, that was incredible for them. I think that was also so instrumental for them in the course and also just in their collegiate experience. I wish that I could get all of them in here into SUMA the first semester that they're here, right. To make those connections. So I just had to kind of make the decision, and thanks to Jason gave me the idea. And previously, when I brought students in, it was sort of similar. I just knew I'd seen the exhibit. I thought, there's a lot of tactile things here. It'd be really fun to bring the students in. And I've also just kind of, in the past, just gotten in touch with Jessica and emailed her, hey, can I bring the students in at this time? And so you guys have always been so supportive of bringing our students here, and we appreciate it. So for anyone that's thinking about it, it's so easy and it's so worth it. Just come over.
We'd love to have more.
I know. I think that was kind of my next question is what advice would you have to other professors, like especially outside of visual arts or other kind of performing arts? What advice would you give to professors about working with the museum?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think that there's so much happening here always in the exhibits, and whether the entry point is the visual experience, whether the entry point is the incredible architecture of the building. I mean, in the recent experience of Salt Lines, with all the connection to the Salt Lake and to the sort of climate change, and that could be a political inroad, that could be natural sciences. I mean, it's endless, really. That I think that anytime a student who is kind of experiencing some kind of subject matter in a relatively abstract way can be in an environment where not only are they visually stimulated, but emotionally stimulated by an artist's interpretation of what's happening in the world, or a personal experience, that just anytime that you can make those interdisciplinary connections for students, they just have more opportunity to learn. And I think SUMA should just come to the first week of the semester when all the professors come back, and they put us in even better. Okay, so instead of you coming to us, we should just plan one of those welcome meetings in SUMA and just lure all the professors over to SUMA, because if you're just in the space, it speaks for itself. You don't,
Yeah, I think we've definitely tried our own programming on like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to figure out the timing. If we can get it built into that like welcome back week, that mid-August, just get in with the provost office and be like, make this part of your schedule.
Right.
That we could have the mixer here.
Yeah, I mean,
Tell
we do
people
that
about what's
mixer.
coming. Yeah.
but It's generally a little bit after that, and so it doesn't flow.
Right. Yeah. I know, because it's hard. It's a hard balance, because it's a busy time for the professors and staff and admin, because we're scrambling to get all our courses together, and there's all these trainings.
Yeah.
But I could also imagine that if it was built into the middle of the day, and it was sort of like a moment to connect and eat something delicious.
Yeah, right. Yeah, food always.
I know.
Yeah.
Bring the snacks and they will come.
Yep.
But I can't thank SUMA enough for how you have enhanced my coursework, and I just want more professors and students to benefit.
Yeah.
I can just wear a SUMA t-shirt and run around campus being like, come.
Right.
I was like, do you have a SUMA t-shirt?
I do. I do
Okay.
have a SUMA t-shirt. As a matter
I was
of
like, we
fact.
can get you one. And it sounds like you're enhancing the student experience as well, that they're now, because you're also teaching students how to become dance teachers, maybe not in this course specifically, but in the dance education aspect of it, and just like showing them different ways that they can approach teaching in their coursework that will affect their careers.
Absolutely. And I think too that especially during the COVID times, that something that I became really interested in my coursework was, for instance, when the students couldn't be in the studio to demonstrate their mastery or deep thinking on particular concepts, I would bring in other art forms. It's like, okay, well, how can you represent these concepts that we worked on all semester, and now you're locked in your dorm room? How, could you draw a picture about this? Could you create a photo landscape? And it was amazing to see them interpret kinetic principles and aesthetic principles from dance in a different media. And I think that ultimately it enhanced how they understood those dance concepts. And when we think of bringing dance education into the schools, for instance, in K through 12, often we're in collaboration with other subjects. That's a big thing that we do in K through 12 is, thinking about geometry through dance, or physical sciences, natural sciences through dance. And so why can't we be doing that at the collegiate level? So
It just builds a greater experience for the students as well. I mean, they've now been exposed to more, and it gives them an opportunity to just open their minds a little bit, have a greater conversation in the world.
absolutely, yeah. And to be able to see how they're not just in this siloed art form, that a lot of what they're exploring and researching in dance is what we're researching and exploring in ceramics and music and visual art, that where they might feel like, oh, I don't know anything about that, or I don't have the skills to work toward that. Really, they have so much more than they realize. So,
Yeah. Well, this is so great. Thank you for bringing your students to the museum again and again and incorporating it into your curriculum. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
oh my goodness.
Look forward to hosting you a lot more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I look forward to being back. And, one other completely unrelated thing I'll say is that my kids love SUMA. I mean, I've got little kids,
Yeah.
17 months and 4. And especially in the summertime, before my daughter could walk, I would bring her here all the time. And there's nothing more beautiful than watching a tiny person see art and how they respond to the art. It's also kind of nerve-wracking because I'm like, don't touch
Yeah.
Right?
But in general, I'm always impressed by how much they get out of that experience. I think we need to bring more little people to museums.
I agree. I'm always thinking there's a photo that's kind of like made its way around the internet for the last couple of years at like a gallery opening. And it's like an infant, a guy like holding an infant like up so they can see the artwork, and people don't think about that. And it's like, yeah, they need those experiences to start them young.
Yeah, absolutely. So start them young. That's my start them young and keep them at the museum.
Keep them
Yeah.
going.
Keep them going.
And now they know, if you're bringing them back again and again, it's a different experience every time. Even if it's the same exhibit, I think you see different things, gravitate towards different things. So,
in fact, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
You also build up a comfort in being around something that they may not understand, but can still be there and participate in it.
Absolutely.
Which doesn't happen through any education anymore.
That's
So,
true.
it has to happen from home.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I just brought my daughter the other day to see one of the dance performances from one of my students. And she said, we were sitting in the audience, and she said, "Mom, can we go to the museum after this?" And unfortunately, I was like, "Sorry, sweetie, it's nighttime." And, can we come back and go to SUMA or the museum or whatever she called it? But so she's hooked.
yeah,
Great.
I love that. I've heard of other kids to call it, they're like, it's my museum. Like, right, can we go to my museum? And I think it's really special to have a museum of this caliber, I think, showing the art that we are having, hosting the programs that we are, especially in this community and kind of in, rural Utah. People don't expect it, and I think it's such a great addition, but I'm a little biased.
Yeah, it's a fair bias.
Yeah.
It's a fair bias, agreed. Definitely enhances our city and university. So thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, well, thank you for your support.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
All right, welcome back. Jason and I are with Susanna Herrmann, the Assistant Professor of Graphic Design, as we continue our chats about museum engagement. So welcome, Susanna.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Thanks for coming.
So our first 2 interviews in this episode have been with people from outdoors, dance, our non-visual arts people, and how they're working with the museum. So it's great to have a visual arts perspective. So we're excited to have you here. And do you want to just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what you teach at SUU?
Oh, yeah. Well, I got here about 3 years ago, coming from Indiana. I have a background in philosophy and kind of transitioned into graphic design in my master's. And before that transition happened, I actually worked at a museum, which is one of the reasons why I really enjoy kind of bringing the museum into my classroom. I teach introductory classes like typography 1, graphic design 1, and then some of the upper division classes like letterpress and a couple of special topics classes here at SUU. So that's a little bit of kind of what I do.
Great.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like I know you the best out of all of the interviews that we've done, mostly because I've been able to jump in on tours that you've requested at the museum. So do you want us to tell us a little bit more about, why you incorporate the museum into your coursework and how you do that? Like what are you looking at?
Yeah. Well, I guess right when I got here, there was an event that you all put on, kind of bringing professors in to talk about what SUMA can offer for the classroom and kind of how to make those connections, and even logistically how to schedule things. And going to that really sparked a lot of ideas in terms of what I could bring into my classrooms, and kind of what I wanted to offer the students. And so one of the things that I really enjoy with my typography class especially is just showing them how and where typography comes into play. And in a museum space, it's just really simple and easy to show them what hierarchy looks like, what kind of typefaces are used for museum settings. And so it's just a really great resource to have on campus. And then kind of going into specifics of what the museum offers too, like the music posters, I tie projects really specifically to kind of what I can show them in the museum. So I like to take them on tours, encourage them to see the museum, and also learn about what they can do as graphic designers for museums too, because a lot of students are interested in working for museums.
What kind of projects are you tying in with the works that we have for your students?
Yeah, the one very specific project is a project that teaches them about hierarchy, so what people notice typographically first, second, and third. And I have them do a music poster set, partially because everyone listens to music, and so everyone kind of has a personal connection to music and can imagine a very real or an imagined festival that they would want to set up or go to. And so I have them work on a series of posters that are supposed to be very cohesive, but first and foremost legible. And so you all have an amazing collection of Fillmore music posters from a very specific time period that focus a little bit less on clarity, I would say. It's,
very much, right? I was going to say legible, not so much on some of those.
Exactly. But there's usually enough to kind of comment on, okay, so what are you noticing first? How does that impact the way that you're interested in the concert? Or if you would go up and read the poster, something like this. So that's kind of that's the most concrete tie, I would say. And then while they're looking at those music posters that you all kind of talk about and bring in, Emily's been really great in kind of talking about typography within the museum as well. And so introducing them to branding and things like this too.
Great.
Yeah, I think for our listeners, we're talking about the Fillmore West concert posters from the late 60s and 70s. And we have other episodes dedicated just about those and kind of for core artists. That an intern, Courtney Blue, did a couple years ago, if you want more information on that. But they are, one of my favorite pieces in the collection, so I've been really excited to be able to help facilitate those tours, because I do think they spark an interesting conversation for people who love music history. I was like, we really need the history of rock and roll class to come look at them. We need the communication students to look at them, because there is that history, but then, on the design side, the illustration side, there's also a lot of illustration, collage in those. But one of the questions we always kind of start with is, can you read this one? Or, what do you notice first? And are you pulled in by the design? Does that make you linger longer? Or make you go, I don't even want to look at this, and I'm just going to keep going? So it's been interesting to hear the students' reactions. So.
How have you found your students react to those?
It really comes down to the semester. I think some semesters students are really engaged with it, and it probably is just personal interest level and that kind of a thing. But some of the more psychedelic ones will always draw people in, like the forms that are made out of human bodies, kind of typography that's rooted in human forms is always really interesting. Becky had an amazing idea of coming up with a worksheet for people to kind of engage in a very specific manner, and that has helped a lot, kind of giving specific questions and prompting them to think deeper about certain things. I would say overall they are pretty interested in the posters themselves, and a lot of them are interested in the music industry, and so they get excited about it.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. I can't remember how long ago I did the last tour. It was maybe a month ago, and they, like, as a whole class, you have kind of a conversation going. People are contributing, they're looking at posters, we have this discussion. But every time after the end, as we're cleaning up, there's a handful of students that are just lingering. They want to look longer. They want to ask questions. And we're talking about just even album cover design and like different documentaries they need to watch and things like that. So it has been interesting to see, like, some students do come in and they're just like, oh, this is where class is today and we're doing this. And other students are like, I need to know everything about this and what I can do and how I can make a career out of it.
Mm-hmm. And another exciting thing too is there's always a new exhibition going on, because this happens, we come in every single semester for Type 1 and there's usually a new exhibition, and so they will kind of move into the main gallery and look around there as well. And this semester especially, they were excited to talk about the BFA show afterwards because that was up. And so learning about what the upper division students are doing is just a bonus when they come in and use the space.
Yeah, are there other, so I know about the rock posters in Type. Are there other visits you've done with other classes?
We have not a like class field trip to SUMA kind of a thing, but I've sent people in to think about like landscapes. For example, I'm co-teaching a class this semester with Dr. Dibb in English, and it's called Visual Writing, and we have different modules. And for one of our modules, we were talking about wayfinding and landscape, and we took the class to Zion, but then the people who couldn't go to Zion, we kind of encouraged them to come to the museum and look around and think about landscape pieces, which of course isn't exactly what's on rotation right now, but
there's some in the back.
a few.
Yeah, some in the back, and people did look around and kind of engaged in that way with those images too, and so small things like this.
Wow, great. Are there other ways that you think that other professors might be able to engage with SUMA?
Oh yeah, I mean, even just at the beginning of the podcast when you were talking about the history of rock and roll, is that Professor Ann Paul's class?
Yeah, I think he's teaching it right now.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about the overlap of letterpress posters and posters from that time period as well. I think that could be an easy kind of trip to SUMA to look at those posters. But then there's plenty in the back and out that I think classes can engage with. And I've talked with other professors too, like anthropology professors and English professors as well, who have overlapping content and think about how they can bring students in. I know of a couple of examples of professors who have brought classes in to look at specific exhibitions or specific pieces.
Well, and I think one thing to note is that it's not just the exhibitions that we have that we can use to engage everybody. Like you, when you bring your classes over, you're asking for specific pieces, and we can pull those out, bring you into the classroom, and make that experience for your students. So it's not just what's on display. It goes much more beyond that. And we can pull a lot of work depending on what you need. So how do you find the work that you want? Do you keep it fairly consistent, or are you mixing it up a little bit?
So far, I've kept it pretty consistent purely because of the projects with the music posters and things like this. But I would definitely want to shake it up a little bit more. And I'm teaching a special topics class again next semester for the first time. And I'm definitely thinking about what can I draw on from the back. And going back to that first kind of meeting that SUMA had with professors at the very beginning, that was super helpful for me because we were able to go into the back and actually see how big it was and how much you have and learn about where to look for those items. And so definitely in preparing for that class next semester, I'm going to take a look and see what I'm going to ask to see for my students as well.
Yeah, I think there's even just so much in the collection that I feel like I barely know about, that I'm kind of like looking through online databases and finding something new every time. And yeah, that there's even connections for professors, and it is nice to have a new perspective of how you might see something. I think, like you said, with the landscapes and visual writing, like I wouldn't necessarily think, oh, the graphic design students are going to come look at landscapes. So it is nice to have a different perspective on that.
Yeah, and every time something gets pulled out, I learn something new about the background. Like that new piece, a couple of weeks ago that was just pulled out. It's a life-size painting of this gentleman in a yellow shirt. I mean, I had never seen it. It was absolutely gorgeous. But, stuff like that. Thank you for taking advantage of that.
Oh, yeah. And it's also beneficial for students to know what a museum is and how much is on display versus how much is in the collection. And especially for students who are interested in learning about going into museum work at any level, it's a benefit to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even thinking back to what you mentioned earlier, like your tours, we're looking at the posters, but then also talking about museum branding, museum signage I've now been going through our new style guide. I showed them the old style guide and I was like, what do you like about this? And one person immediately, I was like, where do you think this orange came from? And they're like, this landscape, look at it. I love the orange. And I was like, oh, yeah. They're like, it looks like the rocks. I was like, you know what? Honestly, that's why they did that. But here's why we changed it. And so for them to, I think, see that process, especially in the early classes, has been great. So, yeah, it's more than just the collection. There's a lot of things to learn at the museum. Yeah, anything else you want to add about, the museum, your students, classes?
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking about this because one of the students that I had in my very first class that I taught here is now working at SUMA as a graphic designer, and seeing kind of the way that students move from those entry-level classes to kind of internships and beyond is really exciting. And so it's awesome that there's that connection between SUMA and the graphic designers, so that there are people who can actually learn in this environment too and grow in their skills. So that's really exciting to see for me.
Yeah, thank you. We've gotten really lucky. There's so many good designers, and we can only have one or two at a time.
Right.
But they've all been really great. So we've been lucky to work with them.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks
And we love having you coming, so keep coming and spread the word.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for making it so easy also to
You bet.
make those connections happen.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for another episode of SUMA Observations and Conversations. We hope you learned more about how SUMA is an educational resource at SUU. If you want to bring your class for a tour at SUMA or learn even more about how to connect the museum to your syllabus, you can reach out to Jason at experiencesuma@suu.edu. Keep having your own observations and conversations, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is edited and produced by Julia Dixon.